of Vermont Writers and the Burlington Book Festival, and it's my great pleasure to be your room host for this afternoon. I would like to ask you all to make sure your cell phones are off or on vibrate so that we don't have an interruption. And I also would like to remind you that we will be leaving here after, and there will be a book signing, but we will allow time for question and answer. So we'll just be keeping an eye on things so that our guests is not delayed from signing. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Peter Gilbert. Peter A. Gilbert has been Executive Director of the Vermont Humanities Council since 2002 and Robert Frost's Literary Executor since 1992. He's also a monthly commentator on Vermont Public Radio, so I'm sure many of you have heard him. He talks on topics that cover the humanities gamut from Shakespeare to smartphones. A graduate of Dartmouth College, Georgetown University Law Center, and the University of Virginia, he has been a senior assistant to the President and Associate Provost at Dartmouth, a litigator in the Boston law firm of Hale and Dorr, and a faculty member at Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts. He's also been a sled dog musher, a rock climber, and a mountaineer who can deal with cold and snow and rough terrain, which is useful if you live in Vermont. He now makes his home in Burlington, where there's not as much snow and cold and rough terrain, as he helps steer the Vermont Humanities Council in the 21st century. Peter's new book, I Was Thinking, Travels in the World of Ideas, published this year by Windridge Publishing in Shelburne, is drawn from some 60 or more of his VPR commentaries. I Was Thinking is described as a smorgasbord of intellectual hors d'oeuvres. In each commentary, Gilbert examines current and past events from a humanities perspective and urges readers on in their quest to make order and meaning out of their increasingly busy lives. As an interesting aside, I would like to note that 100% of Peter's earnings on the book, as well as 10% of Windridge Publishing's net profit from its sales, will benefit the Vermont Humanities Council, making him truly a man who puts his money where his mouth is. And as someone who lives in the town of Jefferson, Cambridge, where the Jeffersonville Library has been part of the reading discussion program for the last more than a decade, I have to thank you personally for making that commitment, because that's how the Humanities Council works. It really works for all of us. We're thrilled to have Peter with us here today. Please welcome him to the 8th annual.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate you being here. And thank you for that wonderful introduction. I think it does give you kind of at least a bit of a sense of what this book of essays is about, what its purpose is, and what it's about. I thought I'd talk a little bit about it and do a little bit of sample reading from it to give you a sense of what it includes. If you know the answer to it, if you've heard this before, don't let anybody know. But this is my humanities through history moment, okay? A question for you. What did this mean in 1968 in Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco?
Peace.
Peace. What did this mean in 1942 in the West End of London? Victory. What did this mean in the Roman Colosseum in 44 AD? 5 hot dogs, please. 3 millennia of humanities councils. I want to thank Jay Perini for tell you how much I appreciate his writing a wonderful, eloquent as always, and very generous forward for this book. And the book has 2 titles. I Was Thinking suggests simply that it's some of the reflections, some of the ideas that I've been thinking about that I thought you and others might be interested in. They have to do with 5 different kind of groupings. One is history, one is literature, one is poetry in general, although it's poetry for people who are skeptical of poetry as well. About Robert Frost in particular, and about the state of Vermont, but even of interest to people, I hope, who are not Vermonters. The second part of the title, Travels in the World of Ideas, is meant to suggest that the world of ideas is a big and interesting place, a place that's open to everyone. Go in any direction and you'll find something of interest, surprising though it may be. You can go informally or formally. You don't need anything, really. Maybe, I suppose, it helps if you have a library card. But the world is open to everybody, and not simply educated or erudite people. It's open to everybody, something that I think our society forgets, unfortunately. I think the key thing about this book is that the world of ideas is a fun place. It's rewarding. It's enriching. That's why we enjoy exploring it. We don't do it because it's good for us any more than we exercise because it's good for us. I have a exercise bicycle in my basement that is full of dust. So we do things because we find it rewarding, gratifying, pleasurable. Let me give you an example here. I thought I'd just read you a part of a piece, an essay in here. It's called The Mnemonic March of England's Kings and Queens. Okay. Years ago, an English friend and I drove a British Army Land Rover from the Arctic Ocean in very northern Canada. It was a place called Tuktoyaktuk in Nunavut, south, back to civilization. It was a long and beautiful drive, and to pass the time, he taught me a little poem that tells you the kings and queens of England in order, from William the Conqueror in 1066 to the reigning queen today, Queen Elizabeth II. The poem I memorized is a wonderful mnemonic device, and it goes like this. Willie, Willie, Harry, Stee. Okay. Willie, that's William the Conqueror, that'd be William I. Willie, that'd be William II. Harry would be Henry I. Stee is King Stephen, not a famous fellow. Those are the first four, okay? Here we go again. Willie, Willie, Harry, Stee, Harry, Dick, John, Harry, 3. 1, 2, 3 Neds, Richard, 2. Henry, 4, 5, 6 then who? Edward, 4, 5, Dick the Bad. Ned, Harry's Twain, and Ned the Lad. Mary, Bess, and James the Vain. Charlie, Charlie, James again. William and Mary, Anna, Gloria, 4 Georges, William and Victoria. Edward 7 and Georgie 5, Edward, George, and Bess alive. How we would end this poem, we don't know. If Charles, the current Prince of Wales, ever becomes King Charles III, or his older son becomes King William V. That's somebody else's problem. Well, that's just a beginning of that. There's an essay in here also about Richard II, Richard III, and interesting enough, you may have seen in the paper just a couple of weeks ago, they think they found Richard III's body underneath an old cathedral. And the newspaper says, a human skeleton with a cleaved skull was discovered. Well, you know, from teaching, nothing would capture adolescents' attention more than the word cleaved. A cleaved skull. What they mean is signs of trauma in the back of the head and his back, which would be consistent with a battle injury. A bladed implement, says the researcher, appeared to have cleaved part of the rear of the skull. I love that word, cleaved, split in half, right? It also, the body had a barbed metal arrowhead lodged between the vertebrae of the male skeleton in the upper back, and that the spinal abnormalities suggest the individual had severe scoliosis, though was not a hunchback as he's portrayed by Shakespeare in the plays of the king's name. However, says the scientist, the scoliosis was so significant that it would have made the man's right shoulder appear visibly higher than the left one. So hundreds of years later, just by serendipity, we have this story come into the news today. It's about fun. It's about pleasure. And it's about the joy of language, which readers and writers, of course, both like. This is a piece called, "Aren't Rhetorical Questions Odd?" Rhetorical questions are odd things, aren't they? I mean, don't they just make it harder for people to understand each other? Why can't we communicate in a more straightforward manner? Wouldn't that be simpler? Don't we do it just for rhetorical effect because it sounds compelling and persuasive? Intimidation is part of their effectiveness, isn't it? I mean, you don't really want to argue with someone who wants and expects wordless agreement, do you? And don't rhetorical questions set up a psychic with us or against us divide between those people intelligent enough to agree with the speaker and all those other poor, benighted souls? Why do we continue to make statements in the forms of questions? Wouldn't you think we'd have learned better by now? Do you think it's the Jeopardy effect? Have we watched that TV show so often that we're now sure to state not only our answer in the form of a question, but also our statements? Has American culture really been reduced to that? What will become of us? Who knows? But it's been ever thus, hasn't it? I mean, what does it say about our country that our national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner, written nearly 200 years ago, begins with two rhetorical questions and ends with a third? Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming? Whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming? And who can forget that stirring last line, oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave? But it isn't just Americans, is it? Have you noticed how the English have the annoying habit of adding the words, isn't it, or aren't they, at the end of a sentence in an attempt to turn even the most dubious statements into unassailable assertions? Well, I mean, doesn't it make you want to throttle them? Why is it that parents, too, tend to speak in rhetorical questions? What in the world were you thinking? Have you lost your mind? Did you not hear what I just said? Do you think that money grows on trees? Do you expect these dishes to wash themselves? Who do you think you are, young lady? Whom do you think you're talking to? Where do you think you're going? How many times do I have to say it? When will we ever learn? But hey, we don't have to take everything too seriously. Now do we? Well, it's about fun. It's about enriching your life. But the book, I hope, and the essays in it address itself to important, serious issues. First, perhaps, is the decline in reading in our society, particularly fiction. Not just fiction, but especially fiction. Other writers today have talked about how fiction gives you that wonderful experience, perhaps more than anything else, of living vicariously, of walking in someone else's shoes. Fiction better than, say, film or nonfiction, because fiction can be first person. I, okay? So when Huck says I, you're all of a sudden inside of his brain. And that's not true when you have a third person narrator, whether it's in some fiction or nonfiction. It's really the most valuable, the most valuable opportunity to live vicariously through others, to experience not just sympathy for people, but empathy. And empathy means to actually feel what others feel. That's the power of literature, is it gives us the opportunity to come a little bit closer together to another human being. Can we ever understand completely what another person has gone through or is going through? No, of course not. It's imperfect, it's flawed, it's partial, but it takes us as far as any of us, at least I know, how to go towards better understanding between people and among peoples. Here's a piece concerned with the decline in reading. It's called The Hazards of Reading. During National Library Week several years ago, I offered some surprising advice, especially coming from the head of the Vermont Humanities Council, which promotes literacy, reading, lifelong learning, and civic engagement. I warned people about something extremely dangerous: reading. Reading can lead to thinking, and there's no knowing where that can lead. It can lead to curiosity, and you know what curiosity did to the cat. It can lead to knowledge, even, over time, wisdom, but that won't get you on the cover of Rolling Stone. And it can be fun, but Lord knows, with all the troubles in the world today, levity is the last thing we need. Let me give you 3 literary examples of the pernicious effects of reading. Ray Bradbury's 1953 novel Fahrenheit 451 describes a future American society so hedonistic and anti-intellectual that critical thought through reading books is outlawed. If books are discovered, the firemen are called and the volumes burned. Why? Because reading can be upsetting. Books can introduce you to disturbing ideas. They can challenge the status quo or even your own convictions. Bradbury said that his novel wasn't about censorship, but about how television destroys interest in reading and leads to a sense that knowledge comprises mere factoids without context or significance. Bradbury wasn't the only novelist who knew the dangers of reading. Cervantes, author of the very first novel, Don Quixote, knew it too. So I'd say, since day one, novelists have been putting out products that are inherently dangerous to those who use them. Don Quixote, Cervantes' comic hero, is, you'll remember, a bit touched in the head. He mistakes windmills for monsters and his broken down old horse for a noble steed. What turned his head? Reading too many chivalric romances. And so, at the beginning of the novel, the curate and the barber come into Don Quixote's library and burn countless volumes of romances. Speaking of the pernicious influence of romances, Mark Twain absolutely hated Sir Walter Scott, the early 19th century English author of Ivanhoe and other historical novels that romanticized war and bygone days. Twain thought that Scott had such a large hand in forming the character of Southerners in this country that Scott was in great measure responsible for the Civil War. Twain asserted that the Sir Walter disease encouraged the South to be in love with, quote, dreams and phantoms, with decayed and degraded systems of government, with the sillinesses and emptinesses, sham grandeurs, chivalries of a brainless and worthless, long-vanished society, and with dueling and inflated speech and social caste. That's why, in The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Twain has Huck. Remember, Huck and Tom Sawyer romanticize robbers and murderers. They play to be robbers and murderers, as little boys sometimes do. Twain has them go on to a wrecked steamboat in the middle of a torrential rainstorm in the middle of the Mississippi River. There, he happens upon 3 real-life robbers and murderers, and he witnesses their stark cruelty and the utter lack of honor among thieves. The name of the wrecked steamboat? The Walter Scott. My advice? Stay away from books. They may change your life, and hey, why mess with perfection? The other piece of advice is don't offend Mark Twain. Don't get on his wrong side. I don't think it's a coincidence that the decline in reading in our society corresponds or seems to come about the same time as a kind of a decline in thinking for oneself, critical thinking in particular. We seem to be less willing, less energetic about willing to think for ourselves, relying on others to tell us what our opinions are. Partially perhaps because reading is integral to thinking. We don't read as much as we do. On the web, one actually doesn't read very much at all. It's more like scanning or skimming. What we read is very short, usually, on the web. And I think it has consequences. It discourages us from a climate of reflection, of taking time, a sense that many of us, I think, run the risk in our society of coming to see reading as too hard, too labor-intensive, not technologically aided enough, requiring too long an attention span. It seems to get shorter and shorter. And as a result, we end up having less confidence in our own opinions, in our ability to form our own opinions. Paradoxically, it comes at a time when we seem to have more strongly held opinions than ever before. Insecure in our ability to think and reason for ourselves, on the other hand, firm in our convictions and less open to the thinking of others, the possibility that another person's point of view might have some point of truth in it, something that we can benefit from that point of view. Here's a piece called Schweitzer on Thinking. My daughter was headed to Africa a couple of years ago to work, and so I picked up the autobiography of Albert Schweitzer and was struck by how Schweitzer's concerns about the lack of thought or reason in society are as timely today as they were when he wrote them 80 years ago. Born in what was then the Alsace region of Germany in 1875, Albert Schweitzer was a Christian theologian, philosopher, organist devoted to the study of music by Bach, and physician who worked in West Africa in the early 20th century. He won the Nobel Prize for Peace in 1952 for his altruism, reverence for life, and commitment to world brotherhood. 1952. It's a word, a phrase you haven't heard recently, at least I haven't heard very recently, world brotherhood. In his 1931 autobiography, Out of My Life and Thought, Schweitzer wrote that he was in complete disagreement with the spirit of his age because it was filled with contempt for thought. A man of deep faith, he was nonetheless concerned about both the neglect of thought and society's mistrust of it. Quote, "The organized political, social, and religious associations of our time are at work convincing the individual not to develop his convictions through his own thinking, but to assimilate the ideas they present to him. Any man who thinks for himself," Schweitzer wrote, "is to them inconvenient and even ominous." Schweitzer argued that society tries, quote, "to rob modern man of all confidence in his own thinking. He lives in an atmosphere of intellectual dependence. He's forced into skepticism about his own thinking so that he may become receptive to what he receives from authority. People soon conclude," Schweitzer says, that they are not qualified to come to their own conclusions. Schweitzer wrote that when we lose confidence in both our ability to think and the potential to arrive at the truth through thinking, then general skepticism develops. He asserted that those who promote such skepticism in order to confuse and control the populace believe that in time, quote, men will come to accept as true whatever is forced upon them by authority and propaganda. But Schweitzer believed they are mistaken. Quote, whoever opens the sluices to let a flood of skepticism pour over the land, he wrote, cannot assume that later he can stem the flood. Only a few of those who give up the search for truth will be so docile as to submit once and for all to official doctrine. The mass of people will lose all desire for truth, finding themselves quite comfortable in a life without thought, driven from one opinion to another. I expect Schweitzer is right, that promoters of general skepticism can't necessarily control the beast they unleash, whether they are, as he said, organized political, social, or religious organizations, or I would add, commercial associations. They can't necessarily control for long what the masses think. But that is of little comfort. After all, if skepticism is unchecked, then the mass of people will live without thought, leaping from opinion to opinion when a more compelling sales pitch or more attractive advocate comes along. That's hardly an attractive vision for any society. A healthy democracy requires that all its citizens, regardless of their opinions and beliefs, keep their brains attached. Remarkably relevant today, perhaps I would say tragically so. When we forget that we can learn things, then things happen. Significant things happen. The odd thing is that learning is perhaps the most natural, the most human kind of activity one could imagine. Look at an infant. What are they doing the whole time? They're learning stuff. I didn't realize this until I became a father. Young children, little babies, they don't play. It's all about work, figuring stuff out. I think that, for them, at least at a certain age, the entire world is edible. Only you can't get much of it in your mouth, and you can't chew it. But it's edible. It's a way of kind of understanding things. Then they come in as they grow older. They start to play. They do imaginative play. But really, particularly from day one, it's about learning. What is that thing that's spinning up there? What's going on? Who is this person whose face is coming in and out of me? That's what it's like. And human beings, all human beings, educated or not, love to learn, or at least typically do. Whether it's learning how to repair your car, to cook, to fly fish, to bake, to garden, whatever it may be. To learn a language, to learn to become better at something. There's great satisfaction in that, great pleasure in that. That's why we do it. We take pleasure in some kind of mastery or partial mastery, or just to be engaged in such an activity. When you forget that, what happens? One gets bored. What happens then? Well, you, I think, end up being distracted by other things. You may become more materialistic. Our society becomes materialistic, more consumer-oriented, perhaps more cynical, perhaps more depressed, yearning for something, maybe a little bit of dislocated frustration. Where that frustration would go, who knows? But when you're not satisfied with something, things happen. You're a little bit frustrated with that. Well, that's, I think, one of the consequences here. Let me close with a piece that has to do with both Vermont and poetry and something of these ideas of where we might go. Kind of brings some of these themes together. It's called A Summer Inspired by Wordsworth. Some years ago, my 2 young daughters and I camped out on the side of Mount Mansfield. We built a fire, which they tended constantly with the joyous excitement of youth. We made s'mores and watched the sky's light slowly fade over the Adirondacks and the silver mirror that was Lake Champlain. The next morning, they wanted to explore the stream. In soggy sneakers, we walked up the middle of the stream bed, wading through its chilly pools, stepping from boulder to boulder, climbing over fallen logs, and skirting, undisturbed, a perfect miniature waterfall between rocks mottled with white quartz and wrapped with rich green moss. That, they said, was their favorite spot. I knew, if they didn't, that in the words of the poet William Wordsworth, in this moment there is life and food for future years. The line comes from Wordsworth's poem Tintern Abbey, which captures his thoughts upon revisiting the banks of a small river. It was a place of natural and pastoral beauty that he had visited many times when he was young. He writes that he owed to his boyhood memories of that scene sensations sweet, feelings, too, of unremembered pleasure, such, perhaps, as have no slight or trivial influence on that best portion of a good man's life, his little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. The place I remember like that from my childhood is the Merck Forest in Rupert, Vermont. It, like our campsite on Mount Mansfield, boasts a view toward New York State that is, as they say in Brooklyn, to die for. When I was a boy in the 1960s, we'd go up to the Merck place for family cookouts. One evening, with great uncles and aunts, cousins and kin galore, we went past our usual cookout spot and up Antone Mountain to a place where there had been a beaver pond. The dam had failed, leaving the pond empty and the beaver lodge high and dry. I was small enough to be able to crawl on my stomach up the rising tunnel and into the abandoned lodge. What a thrilling place, a kind of igloo of stick and mud, animated by a boy's love of nature and an imagination inspired by the wind in the willows and Mother West Wind's children. Never have I felt more thrilled or more closely linked to the natural world. Alice had fallen down the rabbit hole, but I had crawled up into a beaver lodge to find a treasure chamber of gnawed sticks and dried mud. With age, Wordsworth's view on nature changed, and so has mine. The wild ecstasies of youth have matured into a sober pleasure. But I have no doubt that by exposing our girls to the natural world and to the words that nature has inspired, they will gain not only years of joy, but also, as Wordsworth asserted, a kind of personal resilience that comes from faith, rootedness, and serenity. I'd be happy to discuss with you, answer any questions or comments you might have. Yes, ma'am.
Peter, is it really documented that children, for example, are reading less? They're still in school, they're still working. Is there support for that?
There is. And Another one of the disturbing factors is how it's correlated to class, to one's family income, both in terms of how much one reads and how much language one's exposed to. People in, say, the lower third socioeconomically, the children at that level, hear 600 words a day. People in the middle income, children of families of the middle income, hear twice that number. And people, children of families in the top third are hearing 3 to 4 times that number. Why is that important? Well, first of all, it makes you, it develops your brain as a very young child in an important way. If that doesn't happen, that kind of development doesn't happen in the first several years, it might not happen at all. That's the way the brain works. It either develops in those first 3 or 4 years, or it doesn't develop as thoroughly as it could. Second of all, it makes you a better student. It makes you a better listener. It makes you more verbal. It makes you understand things more. It makes you curious, more curious about the world around you and more interested in learning. And that's what it's all about. That's frankly what a lot of the Humanities Council's work is all about, is reaching those kids at the very earliest level through child care providers and parents who need some help in understanding how important it is for them to read with their child every day. They are reading, people are reading, both children and adults are reading less. There's some good news in there too. 10 years ago I said to an audience, what do you think the most important development is in education recently? Somebody said, No Child Left Behind? And I said, well, maybe. I actually was thinking of Harry Potter. Harry Potter was a remarkable phenomenon. There's a big, fat book with no pictures, and children, very young children, were reading them. They were not intimidated by the size and the length of the book. And then they'd read the next one. We haven't had a phenomenon like that since Dickens. When Dickens' novels, as you may know, were published originally in serial form in magazines and newspapers. And people in Boston used to go down to the harbor and wait in the harbor for the next ship to come in from England with the next news. And in one case, they were down there and they hollered out to the ship, "Did she die?" Did she die? And everybody knew what they were talking about. So there is hope, and there are opportunities for kids as well as the rest of us to read. If you look at children's books today, the children's books that I read with my children are actually far better than the ones that I had as a kid. Dick and Jane, oh my goodness, you want to hang yourself, right? But the other more recently published children's books are beautiful, well illustrated, and they have better prose in them. So that we have better, and there's an example of something that's better than it was 40 years ago, and we should be building on that. Other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
The popular book right now with children as young as third grade is The Hunger Games, and wondered if you had any comment on that series.
The popularity of The Hunger Games, any comment about that? Well, dystopian novels have a long tradition of imagining the future as grim. And children have been interested in imaginative scenarios dealing with grim since before the Brothers Grimm. I don't feel really strongly either way about it. I think it's important for kids to read and realize that there can be gratification, satisfaction, pleasure in reading, even if it's the perverse pleasure, as it were, of reading something that's disturbing. Kids are not, read Catherine Patterson's novels. They're not all sweetness and light. They deal with the tough issues of growing up, of death, of disappointment, and it's a way for kids to get to know those things. So I'm not particularly, I don't have any strong feelings about the Hunger Games in particular. Do you?
Oh, I work in an elementary school library, and the librarian has banned the book from our elementary school library, and so I was just curious. up for another reading.
Sure, sure. Yes, ma'am. Say, sir.
There was a story on NPR not too long ago about the impact, positive and negative, of iPads and kids. One of the things they looked at is kids reading things, on computers or iPad, and that they now make all these interactive books with videos and sound. And one of the things is that that's starting to take away the imaginative part of reading. Because when you're just reading text, you have to imagine, the characters and the setting. And with an interactive book, you don't have to do that.
Right. Could you hear the comment?
No.
The comment is the increased use of iPads and other materials is a new way to read. But for children, children's books now have on iPads and other similar devices an interactivity possibility that paper books don't have, which I would say is a wonderful thing on the one hand, but he points out you lose the imaginative necessity of imagining for oneself whatever the drama is or what the heroine looks like or whatever it is. It's a kind of there's something gained and something lost there, isn't there? I'm not sure that all books are going to be able to convert themselves into interactivity. I hope not. You got to, do some of the reading on your own and not have everything played out either as a cartoon book. What do they call it? Graphic novel, or a movie. Movies do that. Well, you are part of the converted. You're part of the choir because you're here today. But part of our trick is to encourage others to come to appreciate or to remember again, to recall how fun learning and reading could be. So thanks for coming. Appreciate it.